While Pope Leo XIV has used clear language recently supporting the rule of law and sovereignty when it comes to this country's borders, language that's been welcomed by many conservative Catholics, he has recently elevated a bishop with a personal history of illegal entry into this country, a bishop who's also been publicly critical of President Trump's enforcement policies. For more on this, I'm joined by journalist Sam McCarthy, who wrote a recent article about this for the American Spectator entitled, "Why Did the Pope Appoint an Illegal Alien as an American Bishop?" So, Sam, again, welcome and fill us in, if you will, please, on exactly who this bishop is and what the controversy is surrounding his new appointment.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kyle. Thanks for having me on. So this is Bishop Avilio Menjivar Ayala, and he's an auxiliary bishop in the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., but he's been elevated. He's now the bishop designate for the Diocese of Wheeling Charleston, which is basically encompasses the entire state of West Virginia. Now, Bishop Menjivar Ayala, uh, he's got a history of, like you said, he's entered the U.S. illegally at least 3 times. So he's been deported, right? And this happened supposedly over the course of roughly a decade. That he attempted entry on multiple occasions. He's been deported at least once, removed from the country at least once. I'm presuming he's been removed from the country twice because he had to come in a third time. And it was on his third time coming in that he was able to apply for claim asylum. And once he was given a temporary reprieve for humanitarian purposes, joined the seminary in the Archdiocese of Washington and quickly switched over to a religious workers visa. And he's now, it's worth noting, he's now a naturalized U.S. citizen, but he entered the U.S. illegally at least 3 times. And as I note in the article that I wrote, this is not a matter of he was dragged across the border as a child. This was as a young man. He was about 20 years old when he finally made it into the U.S. This was as a teenager, as a young man, repeated attempts. He knew what he was doing. He had already been deported at least once, so he knew that what he was doing was wrong and it was illegal, and he kept doing it, kept trying. So it's a little concerning that that the pontiff would. I've been so appreciative of his clarity, especially when addressing issues that progressive or modernist Catholics tend to kind of capitalize on ambiguity. They'll emphasize particular aspects, like with immigration enforcement, for example. They'll emphasize to the neglect of everything else that the church teaches on the subject. They'll emphasize the dignity due to migrants, which is true. We do have to treat them with dignity. Obviously, they're human beings. But they ignore also the dignity of the people of the nation that's being invaded. They ignore virtues like justice, virtues like piety and patriotism. They ignore all of that and lay the emphasis solely on dignity due to the migrants. And so the clarity coming from the pontiff on this issue in particular has been sort of, especially coming off of the Francis pontificate, it's been something of a novelty, but it's also, I've really appreciated it. And it just seems to be very much at odds with with Pope Leo XIV's elevation of this bishop, who's never apologized for violating U.S. law, U.S. sovereignty, never apologized, never said anything along the lines of, oh, well, this has been, maybe I shouldn't have done that. We talk about, when you talk about politicians, nominally Catholic politicians who support abortion, one of the things that we say is that they need to, because they've publicly supported this, they need to publicly repent. That they need to say, hey, look, like now this guy has shared his story multiple times, Associated Press, CNN, that's pretty public. He's never made any public repentance, never made any kind of an apology, nothing, never even confessed that it's wrong, and seems to instead, when the Trump administration just last year was conducting immigration enforcement operations in DC, the bishop was saying, that this could have been me, of illegal aliens who are being, who have been found to be deportable, and as we know, DHS has focused, Department of Homeland Security has focused almost entirely on illegal aliens with criminal histories. They're rounding up, child molesters and murderers. So maybe you don't want to be saying, that could have been me. Hopefully not, but just no sign, no semblance of shame or repentance for having violated American law and American sovereignty and the teachings of the Catholic Church on this particular issue.
Yeah, the lack of a policy, especially as an adult Catholic, even a prelate of the church now, is very disturbing. And as you said, there's really no excuse for this because he was over the age of reason when, he traveled, I believe, with his family the first time, but then later on, a decade later or so, when he was a young adult, at least a couple times, and he smuggled in the trunk of a car. So he clearly knew what he was doing. He clearly knew he was violating the border regulations of this country and has yet to apologize for that. As you pointed out just now and in your article, very disturbing. He also makes the claim, or I guess maybe others have made the claim that, oh, well, he was, fleeing a bad situation in his former country, El Salvador. I think it was a civil war, or maybe some other reasons that he's claimed. But whatever the reason, the question is, why did it have to be he would settle in the US? Because didn't he travel through other countries to get here? I don't, my geography is not 100%, but I don't think El Salvador borders us, right?
Yeah, so the bishop traveled through, and bear in mind he was not a bishop at the time. He was about 9 years old when he and his family left El Salvador due to violent conflict in the country, as seems to happen a lot with a lot of these Central and South American countries. But he had to travel through at least two other countries in order to reach the U.S. border. So he had to travel through Guatemala and Mexico at the very least. He could have also, I don't know what route he and his family took. They could have also gone through Honduras. So that's two, at most three other countries that they would have had to pass through. And he ended up crossing originally in California. So that means that he traveled the entire length of Mexico. So this was not, a short little, journey. This wasn't a tiny little jaunt, from one Mexican state through another, and up to the border. He traveled the entire length of Mexico, the longest portion of Mexico in order to arrive at the border with California. And we had a ruling recently from the, I believe it was the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, where they determined in a particular case, you had a fellow come from a foreign national from Africa who came over, he was from Mauritania, I believe, and he came over here and he made asylum claims. The asylum claims were rejected for a number of reasons. The immigration judge who heard the case said that, there's so many inconsistencies. He said that his brother had been, captured and enslaved. And then he said that his brother was actually dead. And then he said, actually, my brother is perfectly fine. And then his sister sent a letter saying, like, his brother is dead and stuff, or he's got four brothers and they're all dead. And he was like, I got like two brothers, whatever. But one of the big things was the court, and this wasn't an issue that was before the appellate court, but the court decided of its own accord, we're going to note this. They noted the fact that he had to come through multiple other countries. He had to leave Mauritania, pass through other countries to get to an airport, land somewhere in Mexico, pass through Mexico, and then hit the border, and then try to enter the U.S. And they said, basically, he should have claimed asylum in the very first country that he came to that was safe, to settle in, that he could have claimed asylum in. It really undermines your claims for asylum if you have to pass through multiple countries to get to the U.S. You're picking and choosing at that point. The old expression, beggars can't be choosers. I feel like that's intensified if you're begging for your life, You shouldn't be able to just wander through, oh, well, there's this place and I could settle here and be perfectly safe. But if I keep going, I can also then settle in America and I can make a lot more money and probably be safe. So it it really undermines the humanitarian aspect of it and the claims for, oh, well, I'm claiming asylum. Also, the fact that, I mean, with Bishop Menjivar Ayala, the fact that he basically spent a decade outside of his own country before entering the U.S. on a long-term basis. He left El Salvador, and for the next 10 years was fine. And he kept getting deported from the U.S. So he knew, first of all, you're not supposed to be here, violating our laws, kept violating them anyway. But beyond that, he kept getting sent back and didn't, nothing happened. Like, it kind of seems like, oh, well, okay, like you left El Salvador, okay, which is the immediate danger, right, where the conflict is. But then you spend a decade somewhere else and you're fine. Like, you shouldn't be able to then come, to the US and say, hey, I'd like to enter, a claim of asylum. I need your help. I'm fleeing a civil war. No, you're not. You fled the civil war a decade ago. And you've been okay since then. Like, it really just seems to undermine, and it's demonstrative, I think, of the fact that for decades, since the late 1960s, since maybe 1968 or so, we've had little to no enforcement of immigration law. It really has not mattered to a large extent what laws we actually have on the books, because they have not been enforced. We saw this with the Biden administration, versus the Trump administration, and how we had a crisis, literal crisis at the southern border. With we had at least, and it's way more than this, but we had at least, as far as the records go, at least 10 to 12 million illegal aliens enter the U.S. in a 4-year period. That's insane. That's a lot higher than it has been in the past. We had at least 10 to 12 million illegal aliens enter the U.S. cross the border over a 4-year period. And Biden, his argument, he kept saying, oh, well, I need Congress to, support me in this. Well, I need Congress to pass this legislation or that legislation. No, you don't. You've got the laws there. They're just not being enforced. As soon as Trump came back, day one, he fixed it, sealed off the border. We've had 0 border crossings for months. It's been long enough that, according to, I believe it's the Homeland Security Act of whatever that was, 04, 06 or something, we have full operational control of the border, because we've had 0 crossings for whatever it is, 9, 10, 12 months at this point, I think. So really, it's just been a matter of, we have these laws that people have not been enforcing. We've been seeing in our bureaucracy the same thing that we're seeing in our leftist, progressive, skewing bishops, with this idea of, oh, well, we're just going to be kind. Oh, well, we're just going to bring you in. We'll bring you in. We'll give you a home. You tell us you're fleeing violence. That's fine. We're not going to pay too much attention to the fact that you actually fled that violence a decade ago. It just doesn't. It doesn't make sense unless you look at it in the context of people really just kind of taking that warped sense of charity and setting it all on its own. That misunderstanding of charity, and it ceases to be charity if it's not balanced by the other virtues. If it's not in accord with justice, it's no longer charity. If it's not in accord with, the duties and obligations that you have to others, that you have to the people of your own nation, the people that you are in a position of authority as a ruler, as an immigration enforcement officer, as whatever, a president, a politician, you have authority over these people, and it's not for your benefit, it's for theirs. And what you're doing is ignoring those responsibilities, those obligations. And so the charity, which, seems at the time like the chief of all virtues, ceases to be a virtue, because it's not in accord, it's not in harmony with any of the other virtues. You're taking it out all on its own, and it ends up being damaging. tremendously damaging, as we've seen over the years with rapes and murders of American citizens by illegal aliens, just repeatedly.
Last couple questions for you. Number one, why do you think Pope Leo chose his new diocese? That would be the diocese, as you mentioned, of Wheeling Charleston, West Virginia. Why do you think Pope Leo chose that diocese, which happens to be very rural, seemingly conservative, low Hispanic? I think Ayala ministered to Hispanics in the DC area when he was there under Wilton Gregory and ordained by the infamous Cardinal McCarrick, ex Cardinal McCarrick. Why Wheeling Charleston, number one? And then number two, how does a placement like this undermine what Leo has said and done during his about his first year of his pontificate?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm presuming that it's been recommended by bishops here. And we know the bishops here, and this was my colleague Paul Kenger actually wrote about this about a week ago. The bishops here have taken this aggressive stance against President Trump's immigration policies. A lot of that, of course, is linked to the massive amounts of literally tens of millions of dollars that they make for providing immigration and refugee resettlement services and stuff. So that they're losing out on tens of millions of dollars annually. So obviously they want more people coming in that they can, just shuttle into the U.S. and get paid for it. Get paid for distributing these prepaid cell phones and prepaid debit cards and stuff. Um, so they're not happy about that. It with all charity towards the pontiff, my guess would have to be that somebody here or a group of people here, bishops here, recommended this move to the Pope, and that he probably just went along with it. Just trusted his people, didn't look into it too much. It is, though, particularly given the fact that Pope Leo is an American. He's an American Pope. It seems difficult to imagine that he wouldn't look into it at least the littlest bit, that there wouldn't be, even a cursory, like, well, let's just see, wait a minute, this guy came into the country illegally 3 times. I'm, kind of in a fight with President Trump right now. He thinks I'm his enemy or something. He's not, obviously, but, maybe this wouldn't be the wisest move, for American Catholics at the moment. Maybe this would sow more confusion than it would good, So I think that maybe there was you know, could have looked into this more on the Vatican's end. I really don't understand why West Virginia was chosen. It doesn't seem like the ideal choice for someone whose, politics skew to the left and whose ministry has been focused almost entirely on the Hispanic community. I mean, there's like, there's very few, not much of a Hispanic community in West Virginia. It's, I think, less than 2% of the state's population. So I'm not 100% sure the reasoning behind the decision, but I am hoping that some kind of clarity, some kind of clarification will be provided at some point, because otherwise this is going to be an issue for Catholics. This is going to be, and I mean, I'm not saying a huge stumbling block. I'm not saying I expect people to just leave the church over this, obviously, but it is going to be a matter of, what are we doing here? Is this just more confusion? Is this, graduating from the chaos of the Francis pontificate to just kind of a two-faced doublespeak standard? What's going on here? Why are you saying one thing but then doing something else? And it may be that the Pope is doing it unwittingly, that has no idea who this guy is. He was recommended for the position by the American bishops. So he said, all right, great, sounds good, I'll do it. Who knows? But I do think that it would be beneficial if some kind of clarification were provided to make sense of this move for American Catholics. And I think it would be beneficial if Bishop Menjivar Ayala were to apologize for we're to recognize, no matter what he thinks of immigration law or policy, recognize that these are laws, they're American laws, they were just laws. He violated them, and apologize and say, I'd like to, apologize and thank you for, looking past, my violations of your law and welcoming me nonetheless. Hasn't done that.
All right, everyone. Sam's article will be linked in the show notes. Please go click it and read it. It's over at the American Spectator, but that's not the only outlet that Sam writes for. Sam, where can people find your other work?
Yeah, so I write for the American Spectator, where I'm a contributing editor and the George Newmeyer Fellow. I also write for the Washington Stand, and I do occasional writing for other outlets like Crisis Magazine, The Wanderer. I've even been published in a few international outlets. So you can find my work in a handful of places.
Very good. Well, we appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us, and we look forward to future conversations about future articles. Once again, thanks, Sam, and everyone out there, go check out Sam's work. And everyone, have a great day. God bless you.